we go. Now that I can hear you, I was gonna say,
Okay.
yeah. No, I figured I might as well go for a walk. So.
All right, cool. All right, greetings, everybody. We are live again with another edition of Deconversion Stories. And today I'm talking to another fellow ex-Jew like myself. His name is Mike Millen. You can follow him on Twitter. I have a link to his Twitter handle below in the description. And you don't have a YouTube channel that I could find anyway, so I didn't put a link to it.
Yeah, no, I used to have a YouTube channel, but I didn't really do any atheist content on it, so it would feel kind of weird to advertise. And I haven't done a video in like 5 years, so that ship has sailed.
No problem. If you ever get back into it, let me know, and I'll promote the channel as much as I can.
Oh,
and
awesome,
anyways, Mike, what I do here is I talk to people about their leaving their faith behind, and sort of what sort of led to the non-belief, like the kind of things that you started seeing or understanding that just didn't make sense to you, and the progress from that to becoming the atheist that you are today, kind of thing. So take us back to the beginning, and let's kind of go through that and mull around with that.
Yeah, awesome. So in the beginning, very apropos. Yeah. So I would say that first of all, I'll give a little bit of background. So my upbringing. So I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and within Orthodoxy, there's sort of a spectrum of religiosity, and I grew up in a more modern Orthodox setting. That's what they call it, where it's like, they're Orthodox, they keep Shabbat and they keep kosher, which that I would say is really the two biggest contributing factor, like determining factors that make up whether or not you would be classified as like Orthodox or not. But modern in the sense that we were sort of we were with it. We had television, we had we went to see movies, we were in the world. We had non-Jewish literature growing up, so we were living in the modern world, but at the same time living the Orthodox lifestyle. Keeping Shabbat, which really means no electricity, no cars, nothing fun, basically, and then keeping kosher, which is just like very strict, and a lot of functions that I went to I couldn't eat. But I would say that those were the two biggest contributing factors. But we grew up more modern Orthodox, and I went to a couple of different parochial yeshivas that they're called growing up, and I would say that high school is where I really started to get exposed to really fundamentalist Judaism. And the thing was, when I was in high school, the first 3 years of my schooling, I actually really bought into the program, because it's one of those things that that I find that when you grow up religious, when you grow up, especially when you're living the lifestyle, it sort of it becomes the background noise of your brain almost, and you don't really stop to think, hey, like, does this make any sense to me internally? It's just like, that's all I really know. And at the time I was actually quite devout. So, I really went along with the program, even though it was more fundamentalist, and definitely a change of pace from what I was used to. And, by the last year of my schooling, that was when I really started to question, I think. And, like some of the things that my rabbis taught me growing up, really the worst aspects of it, and the things that really made me draw a line in the sand and say, this is not part of my internal moral compass. Just a lot of the attitudes towards non-Jewish people. their attitudes towards women, and their attitudes towards sex. I would say that those three things really, the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that, what they're teaching me is not how I feel internally. And then, one thing sort of led to another, but we'll get to all that.
It's funny you mentioned the whole sex thing. When I lived in Israel, I lived there for a couple of years. And I remember hearing stories. I don't know however true they were, but they used to say that a lot of the Hasidic Jews wouldn't want to come in contact during sex, so they'd do it through a bed sheet, which I found kind of bizarre.
They say that's an urban legend. I know for a fact that there are some sects of Hasidim that do that, so it's not completely an urban legend. There are sects that actually do the hole in the sheet, but it's not as rampant as people might assume it to be. Oh,
I think it's because you're moving, possibly. So maybe.
All right, I'll be a little slower. Yeah, no, I walk at a pretty brisk pace, so that's probably why I'm cutting in and out. Yeah, so I mean, with the sex stuff, I mean, some of the stuff that I learned also was really freaky. Actually, I mean, the hole in the sheet is not even the most bizarre part of it. I mean, I've heard stories of, when like the husband and wife are engaging in marital relations, to use a more modest terminology. They will have the woman, as they're doing it, look at like rabbi pictures and stuff, so that way, like, it's like a sign that their children will grow up righteous. I mean, like, I can't think of like a bigger turnoff than that. Like, when I was 13 and I started jerking off, like, I had rabbi pictures and shit in my room, and I would just flip them all around,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I don't want him watching.
Yeah. No, definitely not. And then I realized a bit later, that wasn't really so much for him. It was really more for me.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, you just never know. So you got to. I want some complete aloneness here. I don't need no pictures looking.
Yeah, definitely not. But yeah, it was. The sex stuff is bizarre. But yeah, I mean, growing up in that lifestyle, it's just something that you take. It's just something that you take on, and it's interesting to note, like, a lot of the discrepancies between, like, the more modern sects of Orthodoxy and the more fundamentalist views. There's actually a concept among the modern Orthodox. In Hebrew, it's called Shomer Negiah. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I have heard of it. I have heard of it, yes.
Yeah.
No one's really ever gone into too many details of what it is, but yes, I know the expression.
Yeah. So for people in the audience who don't know, it's basically, the commitment to not, come into physical contact with a woman that you are not married to. That is essentially what Shomer Negiah is about. And I mean, some people take it a little bit further than others. Like, I know that there are certain people that won't shake hands with a woman, that they're not married to. So some people take it a little bit further than that. But the discrepancy actually really lies in the fact that, the more religious, the more fundamentalist strains of Orthodoxy, that's not even a concept that they talk about, really. Like, to them, it's just a given. Like, of course you don't even come into contact with a woman. You don't even look at a woman. Like, what are you even talking about? Like,
the husband, anyways.
Yeah. So those discrepancies are, they're interesting. I could go on about them for a while, but it's just one of them that I thought was pretty interesting.
A quick chat. My friend Insects Are Cool has asked, and I'm kind of interested to hear this too from you. As an exJew, can you ask him if he knows about Isaiah 53 and what he thinks about it?
Isaiah 53. Shoot. The funny thing is that, growing up, like, boys that are in like Orthodox yeshivas actually don't learn a ton of like the prophets. So I believe that is that a lot of Christians will use Isaiah 53 as like, oh, that it was talking about Jesus, if I'm not mistaken. I could be totally off base, but
I'm just going to look it up because I'm unfamiliar with Isaiah 53, to be honest.
Yeah.
Describing a servant of God, the book of Isaiah.
A servant of God. Yeah, no, that sounds an awful lot like the the verses that will that they'll use to say that it alludes to Jesus Christ being like the Messiah.
Yeah, it's the 53rd chapter of the book of Isaiah in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament of the Christian Bible. So, of course, we don't really dabble too much in that. But there are stuff in that Bible that comes from the Torah as well, right? So this book contains the prophets attributed to Prophet Isaiah and is one of the books of the prophets. Chapter 40 to 55 are known as the Deutero-Isaiah and date from the time of the Israelites, exile in Babylon. Okay, the fourth servant song, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I'm not too overly familiar with that one myself. So.
Yeah, I mean, if if Insects Are Cool wants to clarify, because I'm not 100% sure, but in response to the whole using Isaiah as a justification, to suggest that it alludes to Jesus Christ. I mean, I was always taught growing up that the main reason why Christianity was a false religion was the fact that the Torah, within the 5 books of Moses, talks about how the covenant between God and the Jewish people would never be broken, and that essentially God, wouldn't go back on his word and just decide, especially with all of the opportunities that he had in the Bible to, wipe the Jews out, and all the times that Moses had to plead for forgiveness for the sake of the people, that it was just generally a promise that God, a covenant that God wouldn't break, and that was the justification. So as far as Isaiah and the allusions to Jesus Christ, I can't speak so much on that. I mean, what I will say is that a lot of the prophecies that the Bible talks about, I mean, a lot of them are clearly not fulfilled, or if they are fulfilled, so to speak, they're just kind of vague and ambiguous. But I mean, of course they are, because if they were clearly defined, then people would be able to clearly see that this is
it's like astrology.
Yeah, it's pretty bogus. So yeah, what do I have to say about Uzziah? Yeah, I mean, he claimed to be a prophet, and he said some things that anybody really could have said, and I don't think Jesus Christ was the Messiah, and I don't think there is one. I think everyone has the opportunity to be their own Messiah. Everyone can dig deep and save themselves. So.
Exactly. We are responsible for our actions, so best thing to do is to be that person, right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Oh, I see. So she says it is it's generally Christians will say that it talks about Jesus, and Jews will generally claim that it talks about Israel. So I guess. But anyways,
Yeah.
well, as you can see, Adriana, we're not overly familiar with it so much because it's not really pushed so much in the Jewish group.
Yeah. And in Orthodoxy, the really funny thing is, like I said, boys who are in yeshiva typically don't learn a whole lot of the prophets. And the really funny thing is, by like fifth or sixth grade, or whatever the equivalent is in yeshiva, they don't even really learn a ton of Bible. Like, they don't learn straight from the Torah, like they don't learn like the individual Torah portions. It'll be much more centered around focusing on the Talmud and the Mishnah, which are the explanations of the Torah. And that, we could go into that too, because the Talmud, I think, is a very misunderstood text. A lot of people really don't know what the Talmud is about. So we can go into that if you want, but we'll stay on track here.
Yeah, let's continue with the whole your realization that this stuff was bogus. And
yeah. So in the last year of high school, it was just a snowball effect. A lot of the things that I was being taught, I just realized it didn't line up with my moral compass. It was, the catalyst for my doubt was really the moral issues that I had with a lot of the things that I was being taught. But I was still trying to hang on. I was still trying to say, just because I'm being taught this, it's not representative of what the religion is really about. So I said, I'm gonna take this into my own hands. I'm gonna do some research. I'm gonna find out what the Torah, actually has to say on these things, and I'll take it from there. And I study the Torah and I read a lot of these sources, and I'm forced to admit to myself that it doesn't, that morally speaking, the values of the Torah, I just did not identify with. I didn't identify with the homophobia. I didn't identify with the rigid, the rigid roles for people in society. And it's very fatalist in a way. It talks a lot about people who are eligible to participate in ceremonies in the temple. And there are passages where it talks about, if you're a man who has crushed testicles, if you're a man that comes from if you were born out of wedlock, if you're a woman, because of course women are not allowed to participate, that's just a given. And a lot of those things didn't, it wasn't compatible with my morality. And so I was sort of at a crossroads, and I said, okay, this doesn't really jive with me, but where do I go from here? And, that's when I started studying, the science. And, by the time I started learning a little of the science and, things like evolution and such, that was when it was like, I said to myself, undeniably, yeah, I'm an atheist. Like, there's no way that I could, because in the context of the fact that I thought that the morality was really archaic, but I didn't have a blueprint. I didn't have a model that I could say, well, okay, how then how did the world come into existence? How why are we here? Why is the universe and all these things? I didn't have a blueprint or a model because I couldn't even conceive of a world that existed without God. And, once I started learning those things, and I realized, oh yeah, a lot of these things that happen naturally that we, attribute to God, we can break down and quantify all of the natural processes that are happening here, and none of them require divine intervention. And especially when I started learning about planetary formation and how the Earth developed, I said, yeah, this makes so much more sense to me that this planet evolved over the course of billions of years rather than just poofing into existence 6,000 years ago. So once I started learning the science, that
Yeah.
was really it.
Something along those lines similar for me as well. And the funny thing is for myself anyways, I went out of the Judaism thing and I ended up dabbling in a little bit of the other paganistic type belief systems for a little while because I just thought they were kind of cool and something
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And then eventually I just toss it all aside.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who's a Buddhist, and he'll argue with me about a lot of this stuff, and I'll be like, come on, I mean that stuff never particularly interested me. I do know a lot of people that when they leave their religion, they dabble in a lot of those things, and I mean I understand why. It's easy to lose. When you lose that meaning in your life, it's like, okay, how do I retain a semblance of some of that meaning? I mean, for me it was easy because the religion didn't particularly mean so much to me. I mean, it was weird because I was devout, and it was more of a result as I said, look, I believe this to be true. And if I believe it to be true, then that means that I should be engaging in it to the best of my ability. Because why would I be duplicitous and say, I believe something to be true, but I'm not going to act on it in any tangible way.
That would be almost pointless.
Yeah. I mean, I have a coworker of mine who I talk to about with some of this stuff, and I sort of have to keep it. I have to keep it light because I work with a lot of religious Jews, and so I don't get too deep into it. Only with people that I know are not gonna
cover
their ears and be offended. But
la 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 la.
yeah, no. Some people, they just don't want to hear. I said, like, look, if you wanna come listen to the podcast, if you're brave enough, if you, I just when I talk to religious people about a lot of this stuff, I'll say, at a very early age, I believed one thing. And then I got information that I didn't have before, and I changed my mind. And I'm not afraid to change my mind when I'm wrong. I'm not afraid to say I don't know something if I don't know the answer to something. And it's just like
that's great.
Getting
it's an intellectually honest answer.
Yeah, exactly. I even told one of the guys that I work with like special needs guys, and I asked him a question, and he tells me I don't know, and I said, oh, that's a great answer, and he said, why is I don't know a great answer? And I said, because if you don't know the answer, then that's the right answer. You don't make something up just because you don't know.
Yeah. That the God, right? So that's what it's called. That's each. Well, it must be God. Let's just. You hearing me? Okay.
Yeah. You were just cutting in and out a little bit, but I hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah. So what I was saying is, when we say we don't know, we're not doing the God of the gaps fallacy. So.
Right. Exactly. And it's that's usually what I'll hear. And it'll ultimately come down to you can't explain the universe to me, so me saying that it's God is just as valid as me saying I don't know the answer. And I try to tell them that if that was the case, then I could make up something completely absurd, and it would be just as valid as your God hypothesis. So I could say, I think the
Sure.
expression is like, the flying spaghetti monster, or the magic tea kettle created the universe, and you wouldn't be able to tell
Oil
me
for our
any
sins.
different. Yeah.
I like Matt Dillahunty says I could easily just say it was universe farting fairies that caused everything to come into
Yeah.
existence,
Yeah.
and it would be just as
And
valid, right?
yeah, and actually, I'm glad that you brought up Matt Dillahunty, because when I originally made that when I originally came to the realization that I was an atheist, I started consuming a lot of that content, and the atheist
Mhm.
experience was one of the first, and I think for a lot of atheists, the atheist experience was really, really valuable, because I felt like
Sure.
the way that they articulated, um, they articulated the position of sort of agnostic atheism,
Hmm.
where it's like, well, I may not know for sure one way or another, but nobody can, and the facts, the evidence, you know the evidence points towards the contrary. So I thought that
Hmm.
that was definitely a very valuable resource for me growing up, and I value their input a lot. And it was funny, actually, because when I was sort of like, in going through that existential crisis of faith, I actually started watching The Amazing Atheist, and like his
Oh yeah.
content. Yeah, I like his content is definitely not for everybody. Like it's really abrasive, and I haven't really seen it, too much of what he's been doing in quite a while. But like when I was like 18, 19, I watched this guy, and then my first thought was like, oh man, this guy sounds like such an asshole, but he has a really good point.
He's like the nice asshole because
Yeah,
from what I'm
yeah.
told, people that have met him outside of his shtick online say he's actually a pretty cool guy, but
Yeah,
he's
I'm
pretty
sure.
loud.
I'm sure he's all right. I mean, I don't know him personally, but that those I do have to give credit to guys like that for really exposing me to a lot of ideas that I didn't really have the exposure to, and just a
Mhm.
way of articulating, like, why are we accepting, why are we accepting of, like, the premise that religion has a monopoly on morality and truth and all of these things, like, you
Which it
know
pretty much doesn't. I try to tell
yeah.
them that.
And I think
I was just
when I
reading actually on Twitter. There was an exchange going about the whole morality thing, and how people always bring up like, well, you mean how can you have morals without God? You just if you're an atheist, you could just run around murder and rape people, and there's nothing, no consequences. And the person will reply to them the typical, well, you mean if there was no God, you would do that? Like, would you do that, or would you actually have consideration
right.
for your neighbor, the people around you?
Yeah. And
That's
I
what
mean,
it's inherent within us.
I mean, it just, that argument, it just falls like dominoes, with
Hmm.
just on like the smallest inspection. I mean, you look at countries who, their population is like majority atheistic,
Hmm.
look at the crime, the murder rate and the crime rate, and you'll see that they all tend to be very, very low. And then you look at a lot of the countries that are on the more religious end of the spectrum, and it tends to be higher. And I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not making the argument that B correlates to any of those things.
No,
I'm
no,
just
of course
saying
not.
that it's completely absurd to say that atheism, it would correlate to any of those things, when based on all the statistics we have, we could suggest that it correlates towards the opposite. So.
Sure. I mean, if you consider that a lot of the times people will commit these kinds of atrocities in the name of some deity as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
and it's also, it's one of those things that with Christianity and Islam, it's a much more sort of relevant conversation that people talk about.
Mm-hmm.
All of the things going on with the Catholic Church, and with abortions being bombed and protested, and all of these other things, and Islamic terrorism, and all of those things are extremely important things to talk about. And I mean, by
Sure.
comparison, Judaism. I think by comparison, Judaism is a very benign religion, in the sense that
Well,
Jews.
plus our numbers are way lower.
Right, because the numbers are far lower. I mean, there's far less Jews in the world than there are Christians, Muslims, Hindus, even
Mm-hmm.
religions that people don't
That's the
know
top
about.
three.
There, yeah, exactly. And Jews are very, low on the totem pole in terms of population size. And then, beyond that, Jewish fundamentalists don't tend to enact um, ritualistic violence
No.
towards just an indiscriminate group of civilians. It's much more passive, but at the same time, I think it's really important to talk about, because
Sure.
Orthodox Judaism is not talked about very much in atheist circles. And I mean, the community that I grew up around, and the community that I interact with a lot, there's a lot of things that get swept under the rug that people don't talk about.
Sure.
I mean, there's a controversy going on right now in the school system in New York, where we have an organization. There's an organization called the Afed that
Mm-hmm.
is advocating for secular education in yeshivas, because a lot of these fundamentalist schools, after like fourth or fifth grade, they stop offering any secular education, and it's just full-time
Wow.
Torah. Yeah, it's full-time Torah education. So you have you have a ton of children who are basically being denied an education, and they're trying so desperately to keep the public education system out. They're trying to keep this secular studies out of their program. And
Mm.
it's incredibly important to me, because I mean, if I didn't have the education, if I didn't have the background, I would have been stuck, and I would have been in a position where a lot of these people are, where they'll get married when they're 18 years old, and they'll have kids at like 19, 20. And then by the time that they actually have the opportunity to start thinking for themselves a little bit, and then decide, okay, maybe this lifestyle's not for me, you're already stuck. You already have a wife and kid, and leaving that situation and that circumstances is much harder. And I mean, there's far more that I could talk about. I mean, with circumcision, especially, like, some of the circumcision rituals that the
Mm.
more fundamentalist Jews do, where a lot of babies are getting herpes and other,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, I don't know if I want to get into all the gory details. It's called Metzitza Bepeh. It's so
Mm-hmm.
basically, when Jewish boys at 8 days old get circumcised. Most people know that, but there's another
Mm-hmm.
ritual that the more fundamentalists do, where the mohel, or the one doing the circumcision, will actually suck the blood out from the wound.
Yep.
And it will, a lot of the time, the baby will contract some disease. I mean, like whatever is going on in that guy's mouth, and it puts a lot of babies at risk, and a lot of people are surprisingly okay with it, despite hospitals in New York, putting out putting out forms basically warning parents that there are all of these risks that are going to happen, and of course there are a
Oh,
lot of
advisories.
yeah, yeah, there are a lot of complications that could come with a circumcision. It's not just like a 1, 2, 3 sort of procedure, but it's like a lot of them will approach it that way, and as a result, it's like you have a lot of young baby boys who, for the rest of their lives, are not going to be able to function normally as they would, and it's
Yeah.
tragic, and it's
Yeah.
and even Jews don't do female genital mutilation, um, but there are other religions that they perform FGM. I know there was a story in I think Detroit, I believe, where that judge basically said to that woman who cut the clitoris off of like 150 baby girls, basically said, yeah, that was okay. I'm not gonna punish you for that. And people are shockingly okay with what I consider to be you know genuine, like, atrocities, just because we have to be sensitive towards people's
Well, it,
religious
it always
traditions.
struck me funny. Um, well, yeah, they say, which is just silly because they say you got to respect someone's belief system. Well, no, you don't. Beliefs are ideas, and ideas don't necessarily deserve respect. And I always thought it was kind of funny, like, why are we doing circumcision anyways? Because if we're supposedly in God's image, is he circumcised? And who the fuck did it? Like,
Right,
what the hell?
right. Yeah, I don't know what's going on down there. I don't know what's going on below the
Uh,
belt. But I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, if you don't judge based on belief, like, on what criteria are you really judging? I mean, like, of course beliefs should be under scrutiny, and yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, yeah, if we are, like you said, in God's image, why is it that immediately, 8 days after a baby boy is born, and for other religions, like a baby girl, it's like, oh, we got to chop off part of your genitalia, like right away. We're not gonna wait.
yeah,
We're not gonna wait till you're 13 or 14 or whatever, so you can make a more informed decision. We can't do that, because
right. No.
that would just be too much. And also, exactly why we do circumcision. Maimonides, or the Rambam in Hebrew, who is considered one of the great Jewish philosophers, actually spoke about why we do circumcision for baby boys, and he said the primary reason is to basically neuter the male libido. Essentially, is that you're basically cutting off a lot of nerve endings, and you're basically
Yeah. Didn't work.
dulling. Yeah, you're oh, look, I'll put it this way. I have a pretty healthy libido now, so if the grass is greener on the other side, I can't really comment on that, but you know,
I don't know.
yeah, look, I'm not missing too much, so I'm okay. I'm not standing on the front lines petitioning for my foreskin back, but I mean, I sympathize with people
Sure.
who do, because I mean, like, it could genuinely affect people, and it could definitely be traumatic, and yeah, I mean, yeah, like, if that's the primary reason why you're performing the circumcision, to essentially, like, neuter the male libido, and in the case of FGM, you're just totally removing the woman's pleasure entirely, um, then
Yeah. Well, one of
why
the
are we?
areas, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, why are we doing this to ourselves willingly?
Yeah. Well, I couldn't say it was willingly for me because I don't remember. But
Right.
So I don't think it traumatized me in any way, at least because I don't really think about it ever, and
Yeah.
because
I
I
mean,
just grew up. This was my
it
norm, right? So,
yeah, exactly. It could be. I mean, I guess maybe to be like really cynical, that's one of the advantages of doing it at 8 days old. So that way you have no idea, and it's like, oh, like a foreskin. What's that? Like I didn't even know like what a foreskin was. I was like, really? Like that's what it looks like naturally without any like, you know,
yeah, me
enhancements.
either
But
for the longest time.
yeah, and I was like, I knew like what the bris milah was, but I didn't know like all the gory details until later.
It was weird because even some of my, non-Jewish friends in the neighborhood were also circumcised. I think it became trendy for a bit. Somewhere in
Yeah,
the late 60s and early 70s, it
yeah,
seemed to
like
be that
getting a
everyone
lobotomy.
was doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's next on my list.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess for some people, it might be more due to the aesthetics. And I mean, like, look, if somebody wants a
Yeah,
circumcision, obviously that's, their choice. Like that's their prerogative. But the
sure.
idea that we have to show this respect for beliefs and traditions that are demonstrably harmful to people, just on the
Hmm.
basis of, oh well, it's their tradition. That's really what I don't understand. And it's so
It's a
entrenched.
cop out.
Yeah, and it's so entrenched in the culture too. It's very like, respect for religious belief, even amongst a lot of
Mm-hmm.
atheists, is very
Mm-hmm.
ingrained. And it's like,
Yep.
in terms of like atheism versus anti-theism, um, I don't have much of a problem calling myself an anti-theist because I'm definitely opposed to religion. I definitely think that
Yeah, me too.
belief in God is, overall a detriment to society in the sense that people are, you know, basically convinced of, I mean, what I consider to be a mass delusion. And,
Mm-hmm.
even
It
for
gives them
people, yeah,
gives them a
e-
platform to commit atrocities too.
yeah, it gives people a rationale, it gives people a justification, and,
Hmm. Yeah,
you know,
that's a better word.
it can it can shape a person's it can shape a person's beliefs in ways that I don't think that you're really cognizant of. And the dichotomy between like religion, religious ideas versus religious people. Um, I mean, most of the people that I interact with are religious, and it's not something that we really talk about. It's like, look, if they want to talk about it with me, I'm, open, more than happy to discuss it. Um,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, like it can have an effect that people don't really see. And I don't think that it's due to just like a lack of intelligence. I spoke to my sister about this, and my sister is Orthodox, and she's like a very firm believer. And
Wow.
you know but I'm, at the very least, like, I told her, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in this stuff, and she's cool with me, and we still have like a normal relationship, so I'm very grateful for that. But
I
she
think in
talked.
Judaism, though, I think in Judaism, we tend to be a little bit more lenient on people who become non-believers, as say some of the other more fundamentalist belief systems, for sure.
um I would say so. I think it depends a lot on the sect, I think. But yeah, there's definitely not the level of animosity towards apostates amongst, Jews who believe in God, as opposed to, Christians and especially Muslims. I mean, I know the penalty for
Mm,
apostasy in Islam is death.
yep.
So,
Yep.
that's a real catch 22. But
We're
I
lucky
mean,
too. We don't have to worry about the whole hell thing either.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was one of the things that I see so many Christians that I speak to, and they have this fear of hell, and I mean, I definitely sympathize with that 100%. But I can't really relate to it, because to me it's just such a
No,
foreign concept, and it's so unbelievable to me. It's like you might as well tell me that you know to me, what I tell them, and I think like for a lot of them it makes them feel better. I tell them, okay, well, let's perform a little thought experiment. Like, let's say I told you that Barney the dinosaur lived in my backyard, and he's invisible, so you can't see him and you can't detect him in any way, but he's there. And when you die, he's gonna like force you to be in like reruns of episodes like for all
I
eternity. And
love you.
and you're gonna
Oh
get sick
God,
of it after.
no, no.
Yeah. And so it's like, if you find that completely unbelievable, the same way that you find that completely unbelievable and ridiculous, and it's like, why would I ever worry about that? That I
Yeah.
approach hell in the same way. So, when I put it like that, then it makes them feel a little better. But I sympathize with that, because the imagery that is depicted when people talk about hell in Christianity, with fire and brimstone and torture. In Judaism, it's much different. I mean, Judaism, um, there's this concept called Gehenna in Judaism, which is
Mhm.
it's sort of like hell, but it's not the same. Like
It's
there's no
more like a
torture.
purgatory, isn't it?
Right.
Like you're
It,
just without God. Like, you don't get to spend the rest of your eternity with Him. You're just
right.
out in the middle of fucking Oblivion somewhere.
Yeah, which is, I think like the default state that it would tend to be. I mean, it's like, and my brother asked me like, oh well, what do you believe, like, what's going to happen when we die? And I said, well, I think based on the evidence, like, consciousness is produced in the brain, and
Hmm.
if your brain is dead, then you're not conscious, and so there's just, consciousness ceases to be, and you just go to oblivion, and that's basically it. And you had your
You
time.
return to the same state you were in before you were born.
Exactly, which nobody says, oh, they were afraid of when, before they were born. So
No,
because it's like all we know is life. So death is a foreign concept. And I mean, I think that the fear of death is a big pull as well, because I mean, the prospect of
yeah,
going to heaven and seeing all your loved ones again, it's
sounds
definitely.
wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds great, and then eventually, after a few years, you get sick of them, and you're just like, get me out of this place. And then you realize, no, you're stuck here forever. They like that's it's a double-edged sword, because it's like it's for eternity. You feel like after a while you're gonna get sick of it, right? Like, you're gonna
I
want to do
keep trying to
something
tell
else.
these people that eternity is merely a construct that we came up with. There's no real such thing as eternity, except for eternity itself, I guess. But how would we ever know what eternity actually is? Because you'd never last that long.
Right. You
Nothing.
can't
Everything
you
has a
can't
beginning and an end, right? So
Yeah, exactly. You can't really conceptualize eternity. Like, everything is finite, and
yeah, it's like
eventually.
trying to conceptualize infinity.
Right, exactly. It's a lost cause. um
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, um Judaism, there's really not, the fear of hell is really not such a big deal. um
it's not even
it's really
relevant for us.
Yeah, it's mostly about the lifestyle in Judaism. It's really about
Yeah,
living your life a certain way, from the garb that you wear to the food that you eat. It's an all-encompassing sort of lifestyle, and I think that is the thing about Judaism that is unique. Like, you know, with Christianity, you know, and certainly there are evangelicals that will live their life, you know, in like a, you know, the way that Jesus would want or whatever. But
Sure.
I mean, I don't think that it's as structured and as meticulous as Judaism is sort of structured out to be. I mean, especially when you talk about, you know, all of the different laws and you know everything and the Talmud and the Mishnah. There's so much more than just there's so much more than just the Bible. You know, the Bible isn't even really, like I said, it's not even really taught so much to young boys in yeshiva. Like by the time you get past fourth or fifth grade, you're basically learning Mishnah and Talmud most of the time. So,
Mm-hmm. What's your take on the Kabbalah?
what's my take on the Kabbalah? Um, so I haven't studied a ton of Kabbalah. I do know a little bit. Like it's sort of like the metaphysical component to Judaism. It's I would
Yeah,
say
I
that
call it
it's
Jewish mysticism.
yeah, yeah. I would say that it's if I had anything to compare it to, it would probably be like Sufi Islam, if there was
Yeah,
any sort of
sure.
like
Yeah.
relevant comparison. Um, I mean, there's just like a lot of far out stuff, like, you know, Kabbalah. Like
Oh yeah.
one of the things that comes to mind, it talks about like the seven heavens, and it talks about how, like, you know, the manifestation of God and all of God's names, because God
Mm-hmm.
apparently has like a shit ton of different names, and you know,
Like
a lot,
Steve and Doug
yeah,
and
yeah, Jim Bob, and um,
yeah.
yeah, and you know, like uh some of the more like relevant ones within Judaism, you know, like Elohim,
Yeah.
Adonai,
Yeah.
obviously,
Just
like
gonna say that.
the, you know, the name of God, like the ineffable name of God, Yahweh, is the one that, like, you know, you're never allowed to say. Like that one is, you know, that like
It's
when I was growing
taboo.
up, yeah, yeah, you
That's
know,
why they
it's
have the two yids or yuds
yeah,
or whatever they're called.
yeah, that's right,
You're
that's
not
right. And
supposed to
when
spell his name out.
yeah, yeah, and people made a big deal about that growing up. Like, oh, like you can't say
El
like the
Shaddai. Yeah.
Yud Hey Vav Hey. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
people. Yeah, you know, they made such a big deal about that, and I was like, why? Like what's gonna happen if I say it? Like, am I gonna get struck down by a bolt of lightning or something? And
Yeah. Yeah. What's going? Wait a minute.
yeah, that was
Jim
actually
Bob, the son of God.
they, yeah, that was what I used to think actually, and it was actually talked about in you know, when I was studying the Bible. It talked about how, you know, on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. It would
Oh
talk
yeah.
about how the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, which was a section of the temple that was reserved specifically for the Yom Kippur ceremony. And during this ritual, he would, you know, utter like the ineffable name of God. And if he didn't have full concentration and full faith in what he was doing, that he would die like on the spot. And they would
I always
actually,
pictured like the face melting thing from like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
yeah, yeah, no, some of the punishments that they prescribed, like the death penalties, were really, really barbaric. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and you know, in order, I think from uh like least bad to like the worst. I believe that like strangulation was like the least bad, where they would have like two
Mm-hmm.
people on either side of you like pull a rope. And then I think there was like, you know, death by the sword, where they would just chop your head
Oh
off.
yeah.
And then the one I believe they would pour molten lava down your throat. And like
Yep.
that one sounds like the worst one. Like if I had to pick one, like that would be like the least. Like I would just be like, just chop my head off, just get it over with.
Yeah.
Um,
That to me would be the number one choice because that would be like that and you're done.
yeah, Yeah, and
Like
then there
even
was
choking, you're going to be struggling.
yeah, exactly. Like that would go on for like maybe a minute, minute and a half, but the sword is quick and relatively painless, I would imagine. Um, and then
Well,
stoning,
you wouldn't
that
know
that
for too
was
long. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
like yeah, stoning, that
yeah.
that was the worst. And it didn't sound too terrible, like, oh, they just pelt stones at you till you die. Like, I guess it would hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
I don't know.
to me, that'd be like being slowly crushed to death with little tiny boulders. Like they're
Yeah,
just
yeah. I
shattering
said, like,
bones and
do I get a choice? Like, can they just give me like one big boulder, or do I have to do like the small little boulders? Like
millions of tiny pebbles
yeah, yeah. Maybe they'll bury
with
me under.
slingshots.
Yeah, yeah, like David and Goliath. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
yeah,
So, and like stoning, obviously, it was reserved for like the worst of the worst. Like the
yeah, yeah.
the uh, the homosexuals and the adulterers and the witches. Um,
The witches, yeah.
which I always thought, like, that always struck me as so bizarre, because it's like you never actually see magic, you never actually um it's never actually demonstrated. So when I asked my rabbi, like, well, what is a witch, like, what does a witch do, how do you identify a witch, he didn't really
She's
have
the one
much
with
of
all
an
the
answer
herbal
for me.
remedies.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and
you have to,
they always seem to have cats.
yeah, you have to murder all the essential oils, people, that's
Yeah, yeah.
oh man, it's ridiculous. Yeah, like, so they didn't
I know,
have
I know.
they didn't have an answer for me. I think they said, oh well, magic. I think the explanation that they used, and this was like a great cop out, was that oh well, magic existed, thousands of years ago, but the rabbis of
Oh,
the
sure.
time actually prayed to God to take away the ability to perform magic. And he said, well, I'll take the ability to perform magic away, but for the price of that, I'm going to increase everyone's libido and make it much harder to avoid that sin. So I said, yeah, that's a
And then
great,
we'll cut the tip off.
yeah, yeah. I said, like, oh yeah, that's a great cop out.
Yeah, yeah. Oh shit! I had something I was going to say that was kind of. It's funny that the people are scared of magic when technically God, when He spoke everything into existence, that is an incantation spell.
Yeah,
Like
exactly,
He was
exactly.
performing magic on His own, right?
Yeah, I mean, I,
So,
I think Aver, Kidaber,
mm,
and he spoke, like, and he said, that's where, the phrase abracadabra came from. And, I didn't even know that. I think I learned that from R and Ra or something like that. But
yeah,
when
yeah,
I saw that, I said, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I mean, yeah, that is essentially, everything in the Bible that it talks about all of these miracles. I mean, what is that if not magic? It's basically
exactly,
manipulation of the laws of physics in order to perform these
exactly.
supernatural
Yeah.
phenomena. So, what else is it supposed to be? Um, so yeah, I think that again, the irrational fear of just things that we don't understand, things that we don't know, is, I think, really a major contributing factor as to why a lot of people still
Absolutely.
believe this stuff. Yeah.
It's funny because we do have explanations for men would have been that they just didn't know about back then. Like they didn't know about germ theory. They didn't know about a whole bunch of things, and so they came up with these divine explanations for everything rather than because they didn't have the scientific method at the time, at least not the way it is today. So yeah, so all these belief systems sprung up rather than
Yeah,
trying to figure it out some way.
exactly. And I said, look, to me, I said to my sister when I spoke to her about this, I said, the biggest I would say like the biggest argument that I would have to present to you as a reason why this stuff is not true is that when you look at the universe, the size and the scope of the universe, and you
Mhm.
look at the Torah, you look at what it has to say. I mean, this is supposed to be the the eternal document that is the blueprint to everything, from how we conduct ourselves to the secrets of the universe. And when you
Mhm.
compare it to what the universe actually looks like, it's not compatible. I mean,
No.
when the Torah talks about the creation of the sun, it talks about on the fourth day how God created the sun and the moon, which
Yeah.
I mean,
How the
it's
fuck
funny
did
that,
4 days pass?
yeah. How did 4 days go by? And it talks about how on the third day God created, like, he separated, I believe, the waters above from the waters below and created, the land and plants. And I said, how the hell did we get plants without the sun? Like, how did the plants
Yeah, yeah,
perform photosynthesis without the sun? Like,
yeah. They
so
didn't know about that, so they were just taking a shot in the dark, so to speak.
yeah, exactly. A literal
Unfortunately.
a literal shot in the dark. And
And what exactly was this light that he is? Was it a giant bulb? Like, because there
right,
were no
exactly. Like,
suns,
yeah, it was
apparently.
just this nebulous light. And I think some explanations, they try to talk about it as, oh, like he created like the forces of good and evil, and that's what it's talking about when referring to the light. And I'm like, oh, come on, like, that's
Yeah,
that's
really.
yeah, like that's not like how it
And
reads.
did he need to create evil? Like, why?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why?
why?
Yeah, exactly. Why? Um,
Why
and
would
then
you even do that?
to me, like, really, like, the most damning thing is when it speaks about it in Genesis, that God created the moon and the stars also. Like, the stars become such an afterthought. And I said, the stars are all their own individual suns, and there are trillions of them, each with their own, solar system and planets and everything. Like, yeah, and it's just like,
Yeah,
it's just an afterthought. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna create, like, a couple trillion stars. No, that's nothing. But this tiny little Earth, I'm
little
gonna.
pinpricks in the air.
Yeah, 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 exactly. They're just little night lights to keep it, bright at night so you can see. Um, and the Earth, they spent, 7 days, like, meticulously, you know, structuring that. And it's like, again, everything that we know to be true about planetary formation. When it talks about how, um, the sun. Um, I'm trying to, like, think how to phrase this here. I'll give an example. So the Talmud talks about, um, basically, it argues about whether or not the sun revolves around the earth or the earth revolves around the sun.
Oh,
Be-
geocentric versus heliocentric.
yeah, because
Yeah.
at that time, the geocentric versus heliocentric model was a pretty passionate debate. And
Hmm.
the rabbis of the Talmud, they held that the sun revolved around the earth. Although they did admit that the heliocentric position had more of an evidentiary basis. So at
Sure.
least
Yeah.
they were able to admit that. But it definitely holds by the geocentric model, which we know to not be true. So we know
Yep.
that there are, so I can demonstrate that there are falsehoods in the Talmud. Like, I can bring up an example like that and say, okay, well, there's a clear falsehood in the Talmud, so we can at least acknowledge that, the things in the oral Torah, are not entirely true. And
Hmm.
so it's like, when I talk about like the written Torah, like the five books of Moses, that's when it's, all of a sudden it becomes, a game of, oh, well, it's just being interpreted a certain way.
Sure. But they can say that about any scripture's real. Really. I mean, the 5 books, and for you guys who don't know, it's all we also can refer to them as the Pentateuch as well. So
Yeah.
it literally means 5 books.
Yep.
So, and it's not Pentateuch, which I've heard
Yeah.
been said before.
Yeah, I've heard Pentateuch. Yeah, no, it's Pentateuch. Yeah, Penta 5 Tuach books. There you go.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people
Although
also
the modern Hebrew word for book is sefer. So
yeah, I know a lot of people have trouble with the cha, so you know I can forgive a lot of that stuff. So you know,
sure. So they
yeah,
say it like it looks, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't even have a letter that can represent anyway. So
Right, exactly. Like, what's a cha sound? Like, and it's like the dialect in Swahili. Like, you know, like they'll use clicking noises, like guttural clicking, and it's like,
yeah,
you know, what does that represent? You know, so yeah, it's foreign to a lot of people.
Sure. And Arabic is very similar. It's just a little bit more throaty, I guess. Oh, more of a like you're about to hawk up a loogie or something.
Yeah. It's a more harsh language, like German a little bit. You know, different
exactly.
languages, but I think yeah, definitely like very harsh, very coarse.
Yeah. And like any language, they've all evolved over time too. So.
Right, exactly.
tell that to the Welsh. Yeah, they've got quite the language too.
Yeah,
and I found out I'm a quarter Welsh anyway, so there you go.
Oh yeah.
I was adopted. I was born to Christians and raised in a Jewish family. So
that's interesting.
Basically, my whole life I was raised as a Jew. Yeah. So when people say, "Oh, usually your religion is what you're born into," I'm like, it's not always the case.
yeah, not always. I mean, that's how it tends to be.
I'm an example.
Yeah. I'll tell people. Sure. Yeah, exactly. Most of the time, and that's what I'll tell people a lot. I'll say, like, isn't it kind of telling that, you know, most people who belong to a certain religion, their parents are also belong to that religion. I said, isn't that sort of telling, where, you know, you can tell yourself that, you know, this was a choice that I made independent of anybody else, and you know it could very well be, but I said, you know, isn't it funny that that's how it tends to be the majority of the time? And I say, like,
yeah,
you know, why is that? Like, if the truth, if the eternal truth of a particular religion were so evident, you know, like why would it be that is that structure tends to be the case? And I also, when I talk to people about you know, how religion spreads and everything, I said, well, look, you know, everything that happened, all the events that took place in the Torah and in the New Testament, in the Quran, all take place basically in a small section of like the Mediterranean. And, you know, there are parts of the world where people have never even heard of Jesus. Like, they don't know who Jesus is. They don't know who Muhammad is. They've never seen a Jew in their life. So, I tell these people, you know, if God's plan was to, you know, basically spread the word of his existence and have a one book with this eternal truth, like, he's kind of doing a really shitty job.
Yeah. And you think, if, or as they're saying these days, the expression is maximally or something like that.
Yeah.
He should be able to come up with one book that no matter who picked it up, whatever language they speak, there'd be no issues at all.
Right, exactly. You know, if you can conceive of a maximally powerful being, you know, you can just as easily conceive of a maximally truthful book. You know, that would be evident to everyone that that was the truth, and
Hmm.
yet it's nowhere to be
Yep.
found. So, you know, just because
Exactly.
something has the capability to exist doesn't necessitate its existence.
That's correct.
Yep.
Exactly. Just yeah, it's or actually, I would say probably improbable if we're talking about all that he has. I think it's highly unlikely. And people often say, sorry, it's getting pretty choppy here.
Yeah, no problem.
People often say, well, he exists space time. Okay, great. Exist in our. In order to do that, you need coordinates,
Right.
both
So
space and time.
yeah, he doesn't even exist literally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He says when you break down the individual components of what, because people will talk about, um like, for example, I was walking my dog a month or two ago, and I had these Mormon missionaries come up to me, and they were like, two dapper guys, and they asked me if I had
Mhm.
ever heard of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and I was like, "Oh man, are you guys Mormon?" I said, like, because I was excited, like I was genuinely excited because I had never seen a Mormon in my life, and I was like, "Oh man, I need to get into your guys' heads. Like, I need to know what it is that, like, convinces you of this
Let me.
doctrine." I'm sorry. Yeah,
I said,
yeah,
let me see the magic underwear.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I told them, I said, yeah, like, I've heard about, like, the magic underwear and stuff. And I mean, I was very polite to them. I said, you like, look, I'm sure, like, not all of those stereotypes are true. But I said, at the same time, when they started talking to me about, like, oh, well, God loves you. And I said, well, what does
How
it
do you
mean?
know?
Yeah. What does it mean God loves you? Like, what does God's love entail? And then we'll say, oh, well, like, he made this big sacrifice for you, like, he died on the cross, for our sins. And I said,
Yeah,
yeah,
he
but
gave up his weekend.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I said, but I mean, like, I wasn't alive, and I mean, like, you know I wasn't around to meet Jesus. Like, I don't know Jesus. Like, how can I love somebody that I don't even know, that I've never
Yeah,
even spoken to or seen before. Like, all of the people that I love, it's because I develop close personal relationships with those people, and they care for me in some, like, tangible way. It's like I've never even spoken to this person, so how can you say that he loves me?
but he wants a close personal relationship with you as well.
Yeah, I said, how can I have a personal relationship with, when it's like a very one-sided dialogue?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I seen the prayer helmet was just a tube going from this side of your head to the back side of your head. So there you go.
Yeah. Oh,
Talk
you
to
know
it
about
right
that.
into your head. Oh yeah,
You
yeah.
you
The
you
prayer
know
helmet.
about, yeah, they're for people in the audience, they're called phylacteries, or tefillin in Hebrew, where it's basically,
Tefillin, yeah.
yeah, it's basically two prayer boxes you put on your left arm, and you put on your head.
Your,
And
most like your foreheadish area.
yeah, yeah. And there's like some scrolls in the tefillin with, like, different
Hmm.
verses from the Bible on it, and I'm not exactly sure why it's structured that way, but I mean, it's what Orthodox Jews pray with every morning. And
No, Huey Lewis nailed it. It's hip to be square.
yeah, yeah,
No, no.
yeah. It's like,
A lot of people ask me what the payas or whatever, like the hair that grows from the front of the ear, like
yeah.
down, like sideburny kind of thing. And
Yeah, no.
I can never give them an answer because I never really asked about it myself. So
Yeah, the payas. Um, so from what I understand, there's basically rules in the Torah about shaving, and it specifies basically, like, your sideburns and your beard. So I know that there are some Jews, especially like, people that I work with, that they do
Mhm.
not shave their beard. And some people take it to a crazy, crazy degree. I mean, I worked with this one kid that, he fell down, and he fell down like on his face, and he started bleeding from his chin. So,
Mhm.
we had to call an ambulance for him. And, like his father came to pick him up and take him to the doctor. And this dude had to go back to the doctor 3 separate times in the same day, because the doctor was trying to stitch up this kid's beard, and this kid's dad refused to let the doctor shave it. Like, that is
Wow.
how extreme some people will take it. And like
It's
people,
very reminiscent of the non-blood transfusion from like Jehovah's Witnesses.
yeah,
Like
yeah. And
something
it's
that,
like,
because it could get infected and you're screwed, right?
yeah, exactly. It gets to the point where it's like people's lives are genuinely at risk, and it's like,
Hmm.
oh well, that doesn't matter. I mean, with organ donation, that's another thing. Like in Judaism, because I believe
Hmm.
that the Torah basically says that you're not allowed to donate your organs, and
That's
I'm
right.
obviously like a very, very strong believer in organ donation. Like, I'm signed up for all that stuff,
Me
and
too.
yeah, absolutely. And for anybody in the audience, hey, like, if you're not signed up, do it. Like, you'll feel awesome. And like, just
Yeah. Uh-huh.
giving blood, and like, when I do those sorts of things, like, it makes me feel good, because it's like, it's not.
It's a mitzvah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. And people don't realize, like, it doesn't have to be like a matter of like self-sacrifice. Like, it could just be like 20 minutes out of your
Nope.
day. But it's like doing
Piece
things
of
for
cake.
other yeah, doing things for other people. That feeling where it's like you feel good when you help somebody out, you know, that is ubiquitous among everybody. That's not something that
Sure.
religious people have a monopoly on. It's not something that atheists have a monopoly on, but it's something that we all can agree on. And it's like, it's obvious that you don't need religion to partake in any of those things. So,
Nope.
you know,
There's a little humanist in all of us, really.
exactly, exactly.
Just some of us have it a little bit more than others, I would say. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, because some people are restricted by religious issues, like the whole organ donating thing, and the blood donation thing. And my blood donation is coming up on Wednesday. And Randolph, who's also in the chat with me right now, or in the chat right now, is also donating on the same day as me. So
yeah, no, that's
we
awesome.
have an atheist blood donor group, and we also have I started a Partners for Life group to honor my dad, his commitment to donating. So, and when he
No, that's
passed
awesome.
away, I figured, fuck yeah, yeah. So we got a whole bunch of people that donate all the time.
Yeah,
It's a good
no,
thing
that's
to do.
awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I might have to leave it there, because my brother's
Well, we've
driving me.
gone well past the hour, so
Yeah, my brother's driving
um,
me up the
uh,
wall. But yeah, hey, I really appreciate being on. This was really awesome.
yeah, it was really great to meet you, Mike. And I'll be honest with you, you're the first ex-Jew like me that I've had on the show. So
Oh,
you
that's so
get the
cool. That's so cool.
yeah, yeah. I haven't.
Yeah,
I've
no,
always
that's
talked to either Muslims or Christians or ex-pagans or some that are still pagan, like my friend Ocean. Yeah, it was a nice change to have to for us, and I know a lot of the people that were watching probably didn't understand a lot of the stuff, but you and I had the understanding
yeah,
going on
yeah,
to
definitely,
interrupt it,
definitely. That's
right?
that's
So
really cool. It's nice to relate to somebody in that way.
no
So
worries, man. And now normally I do an after party for these, but yeah, I feel that you're probably not going to be able to come on, and that's fine. But just so you know, Mike, if you're ever interested in jumping in to an after party that I throw on any of my shows, you are now at the point where you're welcome into any of them. So
awesome. Yeah, I'll
when you
definitely
see
take
that
you up on
I've
that.
got one going, all right, that'd be really cool. It'd be good to have another perspective similar to mine in these after parties. So
Yeah, for
right
sure,
on,
for
dude.
sure.
And
All
thank
right.
you so much. It was awesome meeting you, like virtually
Yeah,
meeting you. Anyway,
yeah.
so
No, you too, man. You too, man. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. And until next time, brother, take it easy. And like I always say at the end of these things, oh, by the way, thanks everyone for tuning in and hanging out with us. Like I always say at the end of these things, the famous Christopher Hitchens saying, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. And we'll see you guys next time.